IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. The Takshashila Institution is an independent, non-partisan think tank and a school of public policy. We have education programs lasting 1 semester and 1 year that are tailored specifically to your needs. They're all online and you can take them from anywhere. Admissions are now open for our 12-week graduate program in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology and policy, and the program begins on 7th May and the last date to apply is 30th April. For more information, you can visit our website. So let's get into today's episode. Joining me is Shrey, who works as a research analyst here at Takshashila. Thanks for being here, Shrey.
Thanks for having me, Aarthi.
Okay, so today we are going to be talking about the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Nepal, which happened just recently over the weekend. And we're going to be covering two main questions related to his visit. The first one being, why did he visit Nepal? And what are the geopolitical implications of this visit for the key stakeholders, which are namely Nepal, China, US, and India? So let's get into it. Before we talk about his visit, I think it's important to look at why he visited Nepal right now. So last month, the House of Nepalese Parliament ratified the Millennium Challenge Corporation. So the MCC is the foreign assistance wing of the United States that aims at supporting developing countries in their fight against poverty. By ratifying this compact, it paves the way for Nepal to receive grants amounting to 500 million from the American government. And this money, according to the Nepalese government, will help Nepal, enable it to deliver critical services to its citizens and also strengthen the country's energy sector. So it clearly seems like, it is extremely important for Nepal. But there have been several protests against this compact, and one of the reasons is because the ratification of this compact would mean Nepal is getting pushed towards the US Asia Pacific strategy. So Nepalis believe that, upon entry into force, this compact will sort of prevail over the domestic laws of Nepal. So it will undermine Nepal's dignity and sovereignty. So on one side, there's fear of, increasing US involvement in the internal affairs of Nepal. But on the other side, there are people who believe that it is also targeted against the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So, which is why the Chinese foreign minister's visit to Nepal was crucial at this point, because it was also around this time that there have increasing anti-China sentiments. Because again, a lot of people in Nepal believe that, there's been increasing Chinese interference in domestic affairs in Nepal. So it's not just that Nepalis are doubtful of American intentions, but they are also worried about, China's aggressive policy expansion in the region. So this also prompted, China to respond, and this has manifested into a visit from, Chinese foreign minister to Nepal. Sid, would you like to jump in on these protests of anti-China demonstrations?
Yeah. If you see the nature of protests, when MCC thing was going on, there were protests against MCC. And then there were counter protests by the protesters raising this question of why China is so much invested in what we are doing in our internal politics. And Chinese actions, I think, how they aligned with those who were protesting against MCC, they gave, rise to this suspicion. It gave actually credence to the suspicion that it was China, which was, funding or backing these anti-MCC or anti-US protests in Nepal. And we see before Wang Yi's visit, a former ambassador of Nepal to, I think, Denmark, Khanna, he rebuked China for, interfering in Nepal's internal matters. Usually, such high-profile these dignitaries, they don't speak in such language. But he said that the activities and role played by China in influencing the ratification of US grants should be understood as an interference in Nepal's internal affairs. And this was one day before Wang Yi's visit. So the suspicions about China's role, growing interference in Nepal, they are increasing at the moment, and we can see this parallel in the Indian neighborhood. We see this phenomena in Sri Lanka. There have been, anti-China protests by Sinhalese Buddhists, Chinese domination, Chinese influence, and their intervention in their internal politics, what they should do. Then there have been, a protest in Pakistan against CPEC. There was like a month-long blockade of Gwadar by the locals. So there are suspicions regarding China's role in Pakistan as well. So there is this, in the region as China's influence is rising, it is also seeing the rise in anti-China sentiment. And this is also now evident in countries like Nepal, particularly after the change of government last year.
Right. So I think it really shows us why the visit right now was so important, right? So it's not just because of anti-China sentiments, but it's also the fear of US increasing its sphere of influence in the region. So because of these growing tensions between Nepal and China, it seemed as though that, this was the right time for, China to visit and try and settle things out. So, and even though there were no agreements that were reached for the Belt and Road Initiative, the two countries did sign 9 other agreements and documents. So both sides focused on issues relating to investment, trade, and tourism. And so these agreements included, economic and technical cooperation and a technical assistance scheme for a China aided feasibility study of a cross border project in Nepal. And China also offered to provide COVID support and any other medical assistance that Nepal required. So on one side, China was willing to offer Nepal economic assistance, but on the other side, China was also trying to ensure that the sovereignty of Nepal would be maintained. And they insisted that, they will uphold the principle of non interference in internal matters and will also try to minimize the geopolitical gains in that region. So China is really trying to emphasize that, they are the ones who are going to ensure that Nepal's sovereignty will be upheld and there will not be external interference. And while they didn't directly mention the MCC, I think it's a little clear that, this was in response to the ratification of MCC, right? So, which is why we will talk about, the implications of this visit in a bit. But right now, China is just trying to work with Nepal to resist unilateralism and any power politics and wants to contribute to regional peace and stability. That's what their message was.
Yeah, Aarti, one thing is that the agreements that were signed this time, they were likely the continuation of what started during President Xi's visit in 2019. So there was not anything new in that. They were just like follow up of what was agreed in that visit, and that was a landmark visit by the Chinese president to Nepal in 2019. And what I see, the gulf between two sides is that, you mentioned BRI, and Chinese side did focus upon BRI a bit, what was, important for Nepal, but it was part of the statement that came out on MFA's website. But if you see Nepal's version of the statement that Nepal put out, it did not mention BRI at all. So this is, another indication of the issues associated with a BRI of predatory financing, or what is called debt trap diplomacy. They are taking hold, maybe due to the increased debate about BRI, or the growing nature of, how information travels, what happened in Sri Lanka, what is, happening in Pakistan. So that is there. And this time, Nepalese newspaper, they reported that Prime Minister Teuba, he specifically asked Wang that we don't need loans, you should give us grants. And this is one of the sticking point, that China offers loans and not grants like other countries they do to these smaller countries. So that is a one on that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you bring up. And after the break, let's discuss, the implications of this whole visit and this interaction for each of the stakeholders that are involved. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Think Fast, Suchita invited me to talk about the evolution of the audio industry. And besides the audio industry, we talked about a whole bunch of other things like the Zomato-Blinkit potential merger, the Mumbai 2050 climate plan, and a whole bunch of other things. Fun episode, do check that out. On Press Decode, Sara Vakta, Prafula, and Nivedita discuss the accuracy of the Kashmir files and associated movie politics. On The Longest Constitution, Priya examines the issue of livelihood along with why women aren't a part of parliament. On Say No to Drama, Chetna explains why you should celebrate filing your income tax rather than feeling bad about it. And on All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk discuss India's reserves of oil in light of the oil supply shock created by the Russia-Ukraine war. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. Also, remember, we're on YouTube. You can check us out on ivmpodcast.com/YouTube and get a list of all the YouTube channels we have active at this point. I'd also like to make a quick note that we're doing a small listener survey, and it would really help us if you could fill that out. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance and India Water Portal. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back. So before the break, we spoke about why the Chinese foreign minister was in Nepal, and we spoke about a little bit of the MCC and all the interactions that have happened so far. But let's look at why this is important, or rather, what are the implications of this? So firstly, let's look at Nepal, right? So for Nepal, their first and foremost priority is to maintain national sovereignty, but also to strive for economic development. But this becomes a very tricky situation for Nepal because they have to try and maintain good relations with both of its two neighboring giant countries, right? But also with the US. And it seems like right now, Nepal is the one that's holding all of the cards because, on one hand, you have the MCC, which will likely boost Nepal's economy. But on the other hand, you have the BRI and these agreements that were just signed with China. But both of these have their own consequences attached to them, not just for Nepal domestically, but also its relations with, each of these countries and also with India. Shrey, would you like to add any other implications this might have for Nepal?
No, you are bang on. Yeah, this is what is the situation for Nepal. And as I already talked about the BRI and those agreements, yeah, sense.
Right. And then if we look at China, it may seem that it's kind of a win-lose situation because for China, there was no agreement or no progress for the BRI. So for China, this may not seem like the most ideal situation, but they're trying, to ensure that Nepal does not progress with the MCC because obviously they're afraid of America's involvement or influence in the region, right? So for China, it may not be the most ideal situation. So I think we'll just have to wait and see to see how all these agreements pan out, right?
Yeah. Yeah, completely.
And yeah. And then there's the US, right? So obviously for US, it seemed like things were going in the right direction once the ratification happened. But it brings us to the question, is the US losing its status as a great power, right? Because on a side note, if you look at, with regards to the Russia Ukraine crisis, it seems like the US has lost its endorsement from India because both India and China abstained from voting. So you can see that, and obviously both these countries were acting out of what works in their best interest, right? So India made an informed decision on, what works in its best interest. But this is not an ideal stance if you look at it from the perspective of the US. So,
Yeah.
but Nepal did side with the US and its allies and did condemn Russia's actions. So on one side, the US seems to be losing its, its power and its status. So it's extremely important for the US that this compact goes forward, right? Because
Yeah.
otherwise you have China trying to push not just the BRI, but all of these other agreements. So for the US, it is now that this visit has happened, I think, now we have to see how the US is going to respond, to this whole situation.
Yeah, totally. And I agree with you, except on a point that, when we talk of Indo-Pacific and in that context, US alone, we should not see US, what US is doing alone. It has to be seen in the context of, the Indo-Pacific convergence between India and US. And what I see is that US and India joining forces in areas where the US can help advance Indian interests in the Indo-Pacific, especially in its neighborhood. And this has happened in Bangladesh as well. And now I think this is also happening in Nepal because, as you pointed out, that Nepal took a contrary position to India with regards to the Ukraine crisis. And yet there was, nothing that came out of New Delhi. So India accepts that Nepal's position, and India's own position is different. We have our own thing with Russia, so we cannot take US side on that front. But as far as the Indo-Pacific thing is concerned, I see India as US, joining forces because when we conceptualize Indo-Pacific as a strategic region, and when India and US say that they are, strategic partners in the Indo-Pacific, and then there is Quad and Quad's convergence in the region. For example, Australia coming in Bangladesh, Japan coming in Bangladesh to support India's projects. For example, there was a deep sea port that China was building. Then there was a combined pressure from India and US, and that led to the cancellation of that deep sea port project, and that project went to Japan. And similarly, Australia has recently announced that it is investing in Bangladesh's energy sector, which goes hand in hand with what India is planning, to make that region, that part of the Indo-Pacific or that part of the subcontinent, an energy hub. So that sort of convergence is going on, and I would like to believe that this sort of convergence will also exist between India and US in Nepal. And after the Wang Yi's visit, Nepal announced that its prime minister will be traveling to India, and from on April 1st to April 3. This 2-day visit, and this is Deoba's first official visit since he assumed office as prime minister. So, for India, this visit after the visit of prime minister, after the visit of Wang Yi's, it is a positive development. And during the visit next week, we will likely see the inauguration of Kurta Jayanagar cross-border railway, which is between Indian state of Bihar and Nepal. It is stuck for quite some time now. Indian Railway had finished the trials in July 2021, and there was a lack of law in Nepal. So some days back, Nepal again, issued an ordinance for the railways operation. So that sort of convergence as far as India-Nepal relations is concerned is going on. And then there is Pancheshwar multipurpose project, which is stuck. So progress on its detailed project report is also going to happen. But I think the primary focus of this visit will be on the political relationship. As we know, between the two countries, they hit a historic low after Nepal published its, new political map. placing Kalapani, Likhu Lake and Limpiadura within its borders. So this is first visit after the controversy, and that is an important controversy, this has become an important controversy now, how to handle that boundary problem, which will in all likelihood become an important issue point between India and Nepal. So that will also be discussed. And this issue was, issue always existed. It was, the political map was published by KP Oli, who was seen to be, closer to China. And even recently, Wang Yi's visit, he met both Communist Party leaders, Prachanda and KP Oli. In fact, KP Oli's pictures were also there on MFA's its website. So the close contacts that were developed between Oli and Chinese leaders, and in the aftermath of that, this new political map and this controversy, which will become a political problem between the two countries, because the nationalists on two sides, they will, their own that territory as its own. So it will be one of the important issues, and how India and Nepal can continue to move the relationship forward, keeping in mind the interest of both of the countries and the people who are already settled there. That will also, impact, I think, the most important impact on India-Nepal relation.
Yeah, thanks for, summing up all of that so well, and there's definitely so much that we have to see, how things turn out, now that we've had this interaction between Nepal and China. I think, the next thing to look forward to, as you said, is to see, what kind of progress India and Nepal make. And then, with US and Nepal. So there's so much to unpack, as is the case with any geopolitical or international relations discussion. So,
right.
Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to add?
I think it's a developing situation. I think we will have more clarity after, Deoba's visit to New Delhi, and we'll be in a position of how these two visits, what is the pluses and minuses after Deoba's visit, we'll be in a better position to assess them.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And yeah, on that note, I would like to thank you, Shrey, for joining me today. And thank you all for listening. Yeah, thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM Podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.
If you're a cricket fan, check out Edges and Sledges, India's favorite cricket podcast.
The podcast focuses on Indian cricket, the IPL, and has a ton of banter both on and off the field.
We talk about the week's biggest cricket stories with current and ex-international cricketers, coaches, or sometimes just between us.
And it's hosted by me, DJ.
Me, Varun.
And me, Ashwin.
New episodes release every week.
You can catch us on the IVM Podcast's website, app,
or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Check out the Edges and Sledges Cricket Podcast.